The night I won $38 million, I sat alone in my car in the parking lot of a gas station off Route 9, and I cried so quietly that no one walking past the window could have known anything had changed. I held the ticket in both hands. I checked the numbers 4 times. Then a fifth. I looked up at the fluorescent light buzzing above the pump island, at the cracked asphalt, at the little smear of frost forming on the corner of my windshield. And I made a decision that felt, in that moment, like the most natural thing I had ever done. I told no one. Not a single person. Not my landlord, not my coworker, not the woman at the dry cleaner who always asked how my weekend was. And most importantly, not my family. Not my mother, Diane. Not my brother-in-law, Craig. And especially not my sister, Renata. That was 14 months ago. The moment Renata found out was not the moment I planned. It never is, with her. She has a way of arriving at the truth sideways, like water finding a crack in a foundation, and by the time you notice the damage, the whole wall is already wet. She found out at my nephew's birthday party, in front of 32 people, between the cake and the presents. She made a scene the way she makes everything, loudly, completely, and in a way that somehow made her the victim of her own ambush. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what the 14 months before that afternoon actually looked like. Because winning the money was the easy part. Living quietly with it, while my family continued to treat me the way they always had, that was the real test of everything I thought I knew about myself. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. I grew up the second daughter in a household where being second meant being invisible. Renata was 4 years older, and she was, from the beginning, the sun around which everything in our family orbited. She was beautiful in that effortless, slightly careless way that made people feel grateful just to be in the same room with her. She laughed loudly and dressed boldly and took up space without apology, and our parents, our father especially, treated this as evidence of some exceptional quality rather than what it actually was, which was ordinary confidence worn with extraordinary flair. I was quieter. I was the one who got good grades without anyone asking, who cleaned up without being told, who noticed when the gas bill was 3 weeks overdue and quietly slid it under my father's coffee cup with a pen. I was, as Renata once put it when she was 17 and feeling cruel, the maintenance girl. You keep everything running, she said, so the rest of us can actually live. She meant it as an observation. It landed like a sentence. Our father passed away when I was 24, leaving behind a small life insurance policy, a house with a second mortgage, and a will that had been drawn up during a period of his life when Renata was going through a rough patch and he had wanted, as he put it, to make sure she was taken care of. The house went to both of us jointly. The insurance money, $62,000, went entirely to Renata. My mother explained this to me at the kitchen table 3 days after the funeral, with the same gentle, apologetic tone she used when telling me as a child that there was no more of the cereal I liked. You've always been so capable, sweetheart, she said, folding her hands around her mug. He just worried more about Renata. You know how she struggles. I knew. I had always known. What I had not quite understood until that moment, sitting in that kitchen with its peeling wallpaper and its smell of old coffee, was that my capability had been quietly used against me for my entire life. I didn't need help, so I got none. Renata needed everything, so Renata got everything. My competence was not rewarded. It was simply assumed, and then budgeted around. I moved out 3 months after the funeral. I took a job as an accounts administrator at a mid-sized property management firm in the city, unglamorous, precise work that suited the part of my brain that liked order and systems. I was good at it. I was promoted twice in 4 years. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled faintly of mildew but had good light in the mornings, and I built a life that was modest and entirely my own. Renata, in that same period, married Craig. Craig was the kind of man who was always almost successful. He had the vocabulary of ambition without the discipline it required. He talked about deals and investments and contacts in the same breath as he complained about how the world hadn't recognized his potential yet. He drove a leased SUV he couldn't afford and wore a watch that was slightly too expensive for his actual income, and he had that particular species of confidence that comes not from achievement but from the absolute refusal to examine yourself. He loved Renata because she reflected his self-image back at him. She was decorative and social and moved through rooms in a way that made people look. Together, they were a very convincing picture of a life that was, in practice, approximately 60% borrowed money and 40% performance. They had one child, my nephew Marcus, who was 7 years old at the time of the birthday party and who was, despite everything, a genuinely sweet boy who liked dinosaurs and strawberry ice cream and sitting on my lap while I read to him. Marcus was the reason I kept showing up to family events I would otherwise have declined. He was the reason I swallowed my discomfort every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every casual Sunday dinner where Craig would make a comment about my apartment or my car or my dating life that was technically a joke but carried the full weight of contempt. Let me give you a specific example, because the pattern matters. About 8 months before the lottery, Renata called me on a Wednesday evening. She was using her soft voice, the one she reserved for requests. She needed, she said, just a small loan. Craig had a business opportunity, a friend startup, very promising, just needed a bridge for the next quarter. They were short on cash because of some timing issue with his commission structure. Could I manage $5,000? Just temporarily. She would pay it back by March. I had helped them before. A car repair 2 years earlier. A utility bill the winter before that. $300 once, for reasons I was never told and never asked about. I had helped because they asked and because saying no to Renata had always felt, in my family, like a moral failing rather than a reasonable boundary. I transferred the $5,000 on Thursday morning. By Saturday, Renata had posted photos on social media of a weekend trip she and Craig had taken to a resort 2 hours north of the city. There was a photo of a charcuterie spread. There was a photo of a hot tub. There was a photo of Renata in a white terrycloth robe holding a glass of champagne, captioned, "We needed this so much. Grateful for the people who make it possible." I was not tagged. I was not mentioned. I was simply the mechanism by which the champagne was funded. I didn't bring it up. I had learned, over years, that bringing things up with Renata produced one of two outcomes. Either she cried, which somehow resulted in me apologizing to her for having feelings, or she became coldly furious, which she sustained for weeks and which my mother would then gently suggest I find a way to resolve because it was hard on everyone, meaning hard on Diane, who didn't like tension in her presence. So I said nothing. I just quietly stopped answering when she called with soft-voiced requests. And then, 11 months after the resort photos, on a Tuesday evening in late October, I stopped at the gas station on Route 9 because I needed windshield washer fluid. And I bought, as I occasionally did out of a habit I'd never quite broken, a lottery ticket. The odds of winning the jackpot are approximately 1 in 292 million. I have thought about this number many times since. It is not a number that is designed to produce winners. It is a number designed to sell hope to people who could use a little. I had used a little, most of my life. I had just never expected the hope to pay out. The ticket was worth $38,412,000. After taxes, the lump sum came to approximately $22.6 million. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. The first thing I felt was not joy. It was something closer to vertigo, the feeling of a floor dropping away and not knowing yet where you would land. The second thing I felt was a calm so complete it frightened me slightly. And the third thing I felt, and this is the one I paid most attention to, was a very clear, very quiet voice from somewhere behind my sternum that said, "Don't tell anyone yet." Not yet. I had read enough stories to know what happened when people announced sudden money. I had seen it play out in news articles and cautionary tales, the relatives who materialized, the friends who recalibrated their warmth, the sudden urgency of everyone's unmet needs pressing against you from every direction. I had a particular and intimate knowledge of what it felt like to be treated as a resource rather than a person. I had been living that knowledge for 32 years. So I decided to take my time. I found a lottery attorney through a referral from a friend of a coworker. I claimed the prize through a legal entity, a trust, established quietly and cleanly, that held the funds without my name attached to the public record. I consulted a financial advisor. I did not change my apartment. I did not change my car. I continued to go to work every morning, to eat lunch at my desk, to attend the kind of ordinary social interactions that constitute a life. I did make a few very deliberate, very careful changes. The first was that I bought a property. Not in the city, 2 hours north, as it happened, though nowhere near the resort where Renata had spent my $5,000. It was a piece of land with a modest house on it that needed significant renovation. I hired contractors through the trust. I drove out on weekends and watched it become something. This became the private geography of my new life, a place no one knew about, that no one had any claim on, that existed entirely outside the architecture of my family's expectations. The second thing I did was spend 4 months in intensive consultation with a financial planner about long-term strategy. I was not extravagant. I invested carefully and conservatively. I established an emergency fund that would allow me to live without income for decades. I set aside a portion, a meaningful one, for charitable giving, which I began to do anonymously through the trust. I did not buy jewelry. I did not buy a luxury car. I did not, in any external way, look like a person whose life had been transformed. This, I would later understand, was both my greatest protection and the thing that made Renata's eventual discovery so catastrophic for her. Because Renata had been watching me. I didn't know this at the time. But she had been watching the way she always watched me, with one eye on the comparison. She monitored my social media with the casual attention of someone who expects to always be ahead and simply checks periodically to confirm it. She noted what I posted and what I didn't. She parsed the absence of information the way a person might notice that a usually noisy neighbor had gone quiet. She mentioned to my mother at some point, Diane told me this later, in the aftermath, that she thought I seemed different. Secretive was the word she used. Quieter than usual. She said it in the way she said most things about me, which was in the register of mild concern that was actually mild suspicion with better manners. By the time Marcus's 8th birthday arrived, 6 weeks after I had quietly paid off the renovation on the northern property and begun to furnish it, Renata had spent 2 months gathering circumstantial evidence that something in my life had shifted. She had noticed that I had declined to lend her money, twice, over the preceding months without the lengthy explanation or apology I usually offered. She had noticed that I seemed unbothered in a way that she found, I think, personally offensive. Contentment in the people Renata viewed as beneath her was something she experienced as an affront. She had asked my mother if I seemed different. She had called Craig's cousin, who worked in property records, and asked him, in the casual framing of family chit-chat, whether there were any interesting recent transactions in the county where I lived. He had found nothing there, my apartment was still rented. But he had, she told me later, pulled some surrounding counties out of curiosity. He found the trust. He found the property. He could not find the lottery connection, that was sealed under the trust's privacy protections, but he found enough. A property purchased in cash, through an LLC, registered to a trust with my initials in the name. He passed this to Renata 3 days before Marcus's birthday party. I did not know any of this when I arrived at my mother's house that Saturday afternoon with a wrapped dinosaur encyclopedia under my arm and a container of Marcus's favorite strawberry cake from the bakery on 5th. I had dressed simply, dark jeans, a good sweater. I had parked my same unremarkable car at the curb. I had brought exactly the kind of birthday gift I always brought, calibrated to what Marcus would love rather than what would impress anyone. 32 people. The backyard strung with paper lanterns. Kids running between the adults' legs. Craig in his weekend outfit that cost more than it looked like it should. Renata in a cream wrap dress, her hair done, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had organized everything and wanted everyone to know it without having to say so. She greeted me at the gate with a hug that lasted exactly the right number of seconds and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it," she said. The phrasing was careful, not "you came," but "you made it," as though my presence was a minor logistical accomplishment rather than a given. "Of course," I said. "Where's the birthday boy?" "Marcus found me before I found him. He ran across the yard and collided with my legs and said my name in the way only a 7-year-old can, 2 syllables carrying the full weight of uncomplicated love." I crouched down and hugged him and for a moment forgot everything else. The party went on around me. I sat with my mother for a while. I helped carry out the cake. I watched the children open presents in that chaotic communal blur that always happens at kids' parties. Everything felt normal. Everything felt, as it often did in spaces Renata controlled, like the surface of a lake, smooth from above, entirely unclear below. It was during the lull after the cake, when the adults had refilled their cups and the children had scattered back into the yard, that Renata appeared at my elbow. She was holding her phone. And she was smiling in a way I had not seen before, not the performance smile, not the gracious hostess smile, but something harder and more satisfied, the expression of a person who has been waiting for a specific moment and has just recognized it arriving. "Can I talk to you for a second?" she said. Her voice was light. Casual. The soft voice, but with something metallic underneath it. "Sure," I said. She didn't move toward the quiet corner of the yard. She stayed exactly where she was, in the center of the adult gathering, where my mother and Craig and 4 of her closest friends were within clear earshot. She raised her voice just slightly, not so much that it was obvious, but enough. "I heard something interesting this week," she said. "About a property purchase. In the name of a trust." She tilted her head. "You want to tell me what that's about?" The yard didn't go quiet. The children kept running. The conversations around us continued. But in the small radius of Renata's attention, the air changed. My mother looked up. Craig, across the yard, turned his head. I looked at my sister. I recognized, in that precise moment, exactly what she was doing. She had chosen this setting deliberately. She had timed it for after the cake, when everyone was relaxed and present and the social dynamics of a party made a scene both more likely and harder to contain. She expected me to be caught off guard. She expected me to stumble into an explanation, to hedge and qualify and apologize for my own privacy, the way I always had. She expected the maintenance girl. I took a breath. And for the first time in 32 years of being Renata's sister, I felt nothing that resembled the urge to explain myself. "I don't know what you heard," I said. My voice was steady. Not cold, just level. The voice of someone who has already decided. "The property, Caroline," she said, using my full name in the way she always did when she wanted to establish authority over me. "The LLC. The trust." She paused, letting the words arrange themselves in front of the small audience they had gathered. "Are you going to tell me what you've been hiding?" I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the $5,000 and the resort and the terrycloth robe and the champagne. I thought about the will and the $62,000 and the gentle, apologetic voice that had explained my own dispensability to me at a kitchen table. I thought about every meeting, every holiday, every Sunday dinner where being capable had meant being expendable. Then I thought about the property 2 hours north, with its renovated kitchen and its morning light and its absolute, complete, magnificent privacy. "I'm not hiding anything, Renata," I said. "Then explain the trust." I smiled. And I knew, from the way her expression flickered, that the smile surprised her. It wasn't the smile she was used to, the apologetic one, or the strained one, or the placating one. It was the smile of someone who is entirely unafraid of what comes next. "Not here," I said. "And not today." I set my cup down on the table beside me, turned to where Marcus was playing at the edge of the yard, and called out to him. "Hey, buddy. I've got to head out, come say goodbye?" He came running. I crouched down, hugged him tight, and told him happy birthday into his hair. Then I straightened up, said a pleasant goodbye to my mother, nodded to the room at large, and walked back through the gate to my car. Behind me, I could hear Renata's voice rising. I didn't turn around. I got into my car. I drove 4 blocks. I pulled over. And I sat for a moment in the quiet, my hands loose on the wheel, and I thought, it begins now. Because she had made her move in front of witnesses without knowing what she was holding. She had tried to use my secret against me before she understood what the secret actually was. She had played her card at a birthday party, at the wrong moment, with incomplete information. And now I was going to let her find out the rest. Not today. Not in her yard, on her timeline, in front of her audience. On mine. The week after the birthday party was the quietest week of my life. Not peaceful, quiet in the way a held breath is quiet, full of pressure and waiting. My phone buzzed with a regularity that told me Renata was cycling through her strategies. First came the calls, 6 of them across Monday and Tuesday, which I let go to voicemail. Then came the texts, which began reasonably enough, "Caroline, we need to talk," and escalated by Wednesday into a register that was more familiar to me. "You're being so immature. Mom is worried. I can't believe you'd act this way at Marcus's party." The party, I noticed, had become mine to have ruined. That was efficient, even by her standards. I did not respond to any of it. On Thursday, my mother called. I answered that one. Diane's voice was careful, the particular careful of a woman who had spent decades navigating between her 2 daughters and had developed, over time, a very refined instinct for which direction the wind was blowing. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. She said Renata was upset. I said I knew. She said, very gently, that perhaps if I just told Renata a little bit about what was going on, it might smooth things over. "Mom," I said, "I haven't done anything wrong." A pause. "I know, sweetheart. But you know how Renata gets." I did know. I had known for 32 years. The knowing had cost me considerable amounts of money and considerably more of my peace of mind. I told my mother I loved her and that I would talk to her soon, and I ended the call. What I was doing in those quiet days was not hiding. I was organizing. There is a meaningful difference between the two, and I had spent enough of my life hiding, making myself smaller, softer, less, that I had developed a very clear sense of what the alternative felt like. I contacted my financial advisor and asked her to prepare a clean, current summary of my assets. I called my attorney and asked him 2 specific questions about the trust's privacy protections and what, precisely, was a matter of public record. I reviewed the property deed. I printed certain documents and placed them in a manila folder in the inside pocket of my coat. I was not planning a confrontation. I want to be clear about that. What I was doing was something more methodical than confrontation. I was ensuring that when Renata brought her version of reality into a room, I would be holding the actual version. The invitation arrived on Friday. It was not a text. It was a phone call from my mother, different in tone from Thursday's, more rehearsed, as though someone had suggested the precise wording in advance. She was having a small dinner on Sunday. Just family. She hoped I would come. She had made my father's lamb recipe, the one I loved. I accepted without hesitation. I knew what Sunday dinner was. Renata had been holding family dinners as stages for as long as I could remember. She was at her most comfortable when she had an audience she trusted and an agenda she had written in advance. She would have spent the week lobbying our mother, framing the narrative, positioning herself as the reasonable, concerned sister trying to understand why Caroline was behaving so strangely. She would arrive early. She would have Craig with her. She would have made sure the conversational terrain was familiar and favorable before I walked through the door. She had done this before, over smaller things. The time she wanted me to cover half the cost of my mother's birthday trip even though she had planned it without consulting me. The time she felt I wasn't contributing enough to the family at Christmas. She was exceptionally skilled at constructing the conditions of a verdict before the accused had entered the room. What she had not accounted for, this time, was that the accused was no longer interested in pleading. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Sunday came with gray skies and the smell of coming rain. I dressed carefully, not formally, not in a way that telegraphed effort, but with the quiet precision of someone who has thought about how they want to carry themselves. I wore dark slacks and a simple cashmere sweater that I had owned for 3 years, and that cost, to anyone looking, nothing extraordinary. I brought wine. I brought my coat with the folder in the pocket. I arrived at my mother's house at exactly the time I had been asked, not early enough to be managed, not late enough to be destabilized. Renata's car was in the driveway. So was Craig's. There was also a third car I recognized, Renata's closest friend, Donna, who had been her confidant and informal chorus since high school and who had a particular talent for making Renata's position sound like consensus opinion. So there would be 4 of them, Renata, Craig, Donna, and my mother, and one of me. I had been in that configuration before. It had never gone well for me. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. My mother opened it, looking simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. She hugged me, held on a beat longer than usual, which told me she knew more than she was saying. The house smelled of roasting lamb and rosemary and the particular warmth of a home that has been host to difficult conversations for 40 years and absorbed them all into its walls. I walked into the living room. Renata was on the sofa, Donna beside her, Craig in the armchair with a glass of red wine already in hand. The tableau was so practiced it was almost theatrical. Renata looked up when I entered and arranged her face into an expression of careful, wounded concern that I had to admit was genuinely impressive in its precision. "You came," she said. The same phrase as the birthday party. She kept using it, I had noticed, as though my presence in my own family's spaces were a concession rather than a right. "I was invited," I said pleasantly, and bent to kiss my mother on the cheek before sitting down in the single empty chair, not the low, soft one by the window that would have required me to look up at them, but the upright one at the edge of the room that I repositioned slightly, by about 6 inches, before I sat down. Craig refilled his wine. Donna watched me with the careful attention of someone who has been briefed. My mother busied herself with bringing out small dishes, an activity she used, I had long since understood, to avoid eye contact during tension. Renata waited until we all had glasses and a pretense of normalcy before she began. "I've been really worried about you," she said. Her voice was modulated to a frequency of warm concern that I recognized from every difficult conversation we had ever had. It was the voice she used when she wanted the room to believe she was the caring one and I was the resistant one. "We all have. You've been so distant." "I've been well," I said. "Thank you for asking." "Caroline." She leaned forward slightly. "The property. The trust. I'm not trying to make this a big thing, we're family. We don't keep secrets from each other." She paused. "Unless something is wrong." "Is something wrong?" Donna murmured a small sound of agreement. My mother returned from the kitchen and sat down, hands folded. I looked at Renata for a moment. Then I looked at Craig. He was examining his wine glass with the studied nonchalance of a man who has been told to let his wife handle it but is very interested in the outcome. "What specifically did Craig's cousin find?" I asked. The room shifted. Renata's composure held, but only barely. She hadn't expected the directness. She had expected me to start explaining myself, to fill the silence with qualification and apology, to do the thing I had always done. "He found a property deed," she said carefully. "In a trust with your initials. A cash purchase." She let the words rest. "That's not a small thing, Caroline. You work in accounts administration. You don't have that kind of money. So either someone gave it to you, or you borrowed it, or something is happening that you're not telling your family about." She had constructed the sentence with care. The implication was clear: either you're being kept by someone, or you're in debt, or you're involved in something you should be ashamed of. 3 options, all of which positioned me as less than. I reached into my coat pocket and removed the manila folder. I held it on my knee, closed, for a moment. "You're right," I said. "I do have a property. I bought it, in cash, through a trust, 14 months ago." Renata's chin lifted slightly. "With what money?" "With mine." "You don't have that kind of money, Caroline." "The property is listed at $460,000, I said. "After renovation, current market value is closer to $580. "Yes." The room was very still. "Where did you get nearly $500,000? Craig asked. He had dropped the pretense of wineglass examination. I looked at him. He had spoken to me at family events with the particular condescension of a man who has never found me impressive and sees no reason to begin. He had once, at a Christmas dinner, described my job to a new acquaintance as paperwork, basically. He had borrowed money through my sister and never mentioned it. He had the specific audacity of mediocre men who have married well and confused the marriage for achievement. I opened the folder. I removed the top sheet, a single page, the notarized summary my financial advisor had prepared, and I placed it on the coffee table between us. I watched Renata pick it up. I watched her read the first line. I watched the expression on her face move through confusion, then something I can only describe as a processing silence, then a sudden, sharp intake of breath. She looked up at me. "This is $38 million, she whispered. 22.6 after taxes, I said. I took the lump sum. You won the lottery. The words came out as though she were speaking a language she had just been told existed. 14 months ago, I said. October. October. She repeated it. Her voice had gone somewhere airless. You've had this for 14 months and you didn't tell us. No, I said. I didn't. Donna had gone entirely silent. My mother's hand was pressed against her mouth. Craig had set down his wine glass very carefully, as though sudden movements might cause something to shatter. Why? Renata said. It came out raw, unguarded, the performance momentarily falling away. Why wouldn't you tell your own family? I looked at her steadily. There was no triumph in what I felt. I want to be honest about that, because the story would be simpler if there were. What I felt was something much closer to grief with a spine, the feeling of a wound that had finally been named in a room full of the people who had made it. Do you remember, I said, what you did with the $5,000 I lent you in February of last year? She blinked. That's not, I'll take that as a yes, I said. Do you remember what happened when Dad died and the will was read? Do you remember what you said to me when we were teenagers about being the maintenance girl? Do you remember every family dinner where Craig has made a comment about my apartment or my car or my life, and you laughed, and Mom said nothing, and I sat there and absorbed it because that was what I was supposed to do? The room was silent in a way that rooms rarely are, not the silence of politeness, but the silence of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear. That is why, I said. Not because I didn't trust you with a secret. Because I knew, with complete certainty, what the money would become the moment any of you knew about it. It would stop being mine. It would become a resource. It would become something you were owed a share of, or an explanation of, or a decision about. The way my time was a resource. The way my capability was a resource. The way I have been a resource in this family for my entire life, and it never once occurred to any of you to ask what the cost was. Renata's eyes had filled with tears. Under other circumstances, this would have produced in me an immediate instinct to soften, to qualify, to apologize for having caused them. I recognized the instinct and I let it pass. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I'm just done. Done with what? My mother asked. Her voice was small. Done managing how you feel about my life, I said gently. Done lending money that doesn't come back. Done sitting at tables where I'm treated as less than, by people who would like my help and resent my existence in equal measure. I'm not done with you, Mom. I'm not done with Marcus. But I am done with the version of this family where I exist to make things easier for everyone else. Craig cleared his throat. So what, you're rich now and we're just supposed to accept being cut off? You were never cut in, I said. That's rather the point. The loan, Renata started. The $5,000, I said, is not a loan anymore. Consider it a parting gift from the maintenance girl. I stood up. I picked up the financial summary from the coffee table and returned it to my folder. The lamb smells wonderful, Mom. I hope you'll save me some. But I think I'm going to head out. You can't just leave, Renata said, standing up too. Her voice had cracked through the surface of the performance now. Underneath was something I had rarely seen from her, genuine panic. Not the theatrical upset, but the real thing. The panic of someone who has just understood, in one unsparing moment, the full consequence of years of carelessness. Caroline, we need to talk about this properly. You can't just drop this and walk out. I'm not dropping anything, I said, putting on my coat. I've been very clear. You have my number. When you're ready to have a different kind of conversation, not about what I owe you, not about what I should have told you, but an actual conversation between people who respect each other, I'll answer. I kissed my mother on top of her head. She caught my hand and held it for a moment, and in that moment she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something complicated and old and a little ashamed. I squeezed her hand and let go. I walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard Renata say my name once more. I did not turn around. The rain had started while we were inside. I walked to my car in it without hurrying. I got in. I sat for a moment in the quiet, water ticking softly against the roof. My phone lit up before I had even started the engine. It was not Renata. It was a number I had saved under the name of my financial advisor's assistant, a young woman named Priya who had sent me a brief, professional text. The Henderson Property Group has confirmed the development partnership. Congratulations. First meeting scheduled for Thursday. I had been quietly negotiating, over the preceding 3 months, a partnership with a regional property development group to co-invest in a mixed-use residential project, the kind of careful, long-term investment that would compound over years rather than make headlines tomorrow. The confirmation had been expected. It still felt, in that moment, sitting in the rain outside my mother's house, like the universe had chosen its timing with a certain deliberate kindness. The week after the dinner was when the fallout became concrete. Renata called 4 times on Monday. I let the calls go. On Tuesday, she sent a message through my mother, asking if I would reconsider my position. I sent back a brief reply, I haven't taken a position. I've stated facts. On Wednesday, she called Samantha, not my Samantha. She didn't know about Samantha, but she had found the name of my attorney through the trust's public filings and called the firm's general line. My attorney's assistant relayed this to me with a certain professional amusement. I instructed her to acknowledge receipt and nothing further. Craig, I learned through my mother, had told 2 of their friends that I had won the lottery and was refusing to help the family. He framed it as a kind of abandonment. He used words like heartless and ungrateful, which I found interesting given the general direction in which gratitude had flowed in our family's financial history. The 2 friends told other people. By Thursday of that week, the story was moving through their social circle in the diluted, dramatized form that gossip always takes. I heard this from Lucy, not a Lucy from my story, but my coworker Lucy, who moved in a loosely overlapping social world and texted me on Thursday morning, "People are saying some stuff about you." Lottery? Is this real? It was real, I confirmed. She sent back 3 exclamation marks and a request for lunch. I said yes. What I did not anticipate was the thing that happened on Friday afternoon. I was at my desk when my direct line rang, an unusual thing, as most communications came through the main system. The caller ID showed a name I recognized, Gerald Whitmore. Gerald was the senior partner at the property development group I had been in early discussions with, a man in his late 60s who had built his reputation on very careful investment decisions and an almost obsessive interest in the personal character of his business partners. He had heard. Not from Renata's social circle, from a contact in the trust's advisory network who had mentioned the partnership in passing. Gerald had made a few calls of his own. "I won't pretend I didn't do my homework," he said, his voice pleasantly direct. "When I partner with someone, I need to know how they handle unexpected circumstances. What I heard was that you won a substantial amount of money 14 months ago, told no one, made a series of quiet and financially disciplined decisions, and have only recently had your hand forced on the disclosure." A pause. "That is not what most people do." "No," I agreed. "Most people," he said, "spend the first year sending money in every direction and wondering why their relationships have changed. You spent yours on due diligence and renovation work." He paused again. "I find that interesting." "I find it practical," I said. He laughed. "Thursday's meeting is confirmed. I'd like to expand the agenda, if you're open to it. There's a second project I'd like your input on." I said I was open to it. I put the phone down and sat for a moment, looking at the middle distance across my office. The version of my life that had existed 14 months ago, the rented apartment, the mildew smell, the silent absorbing of other people's carelessness, felt like a coat I had left at the door of a building I would not be returning to. But there was still something unfinished. Not with Gerald Whitmore, not with the development project. With Renata. Because Renata had not yet absorbed the full dimension of what had happened. She had been told about the money. She had been told about my reasons. But she had not yet understood the specific thing I needed her to understand, which was not about money at all. What I needed her to understand was the loan. Not the $5,000, the principal of the loan. The years of it. The pattern of it. The way I had been borrowed from, quietly and consistently, and the debt had never been acknowledged, not once, by anyone. And the only person who could make Renata understand that was Renata herself. That understanding arrived in the way most real understandings do, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in an ordinary moment when the protective distance of anger has closed just enough to let something true come through. She appeared at my apartment on Saturday morning. No call ahead, which was both characteristic and deliberate. She knew I might not answer. She knocked twice, firmly. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing in the hallway in a coat I recognized, her hair slightly damp from the rain that had started again overnight. She looked like she had not slept particularly well. I opened the door. We looked at each other. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back from the door. She sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee. The apartment was quiet and clean and exactly the size it had always been, and I watched her look around it, at the modest furniture, the reasonable kitchen, the complete absence of any sign that the woman who lived here had $22 million, and I watched something shift in her expression. "You didn't change anything," she said. "Not here," I agreed. She wrapped both hands around the mug I set in front of her. "Craig wants me to talk to a lawyer," she said. "About the trust. About whether you had an obligation to disclose." She said it flatly, without advocacy, as though reading from a list of things she had been told to say. "He can try that," I said. "He won't get far." "I know." She looked down at the mug. "I told him it was a stupid idea." A pause. "He's angry. He thinks you're punishing the family." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm just not available to be borrowed from anymore." Renata was quiet for a long time. Outside, the rain moved against the window in irregular rhythms. "The resort," she said finally. Her voice was low. "Yes. I knew it was wrong when I posted the photos." She said it to the table rather than to me. "I knew and I did it anyway. Because I thought you'd just," she stopped. "Accept it," I said. "Yes." She looked up. Her eyes were dry, which was more honest than tears would have been. I thought you'd just accept it. Because you always did. I did, I said. For a very long time. She nodded slowly. The nod of someone doing arithmetic on years. The 5,000 isn't coming back, she said. It wasn't a question. No. But you're not gone, she said. You said, at Mom's, you said you weren't done with her. Or with Marcus. I'm not. What about me? I looked at my sister across the kitchen table. I thought about the girl she had been before the years of performance had calcified into habit. I thought about Marcus running across a yard toward me with uncomplicated love, and the fact that he existed in part because of the woman sitting in front of me. I thought about grief with a spine, and what it meant to hold both things at once, the love and the boundary, the loss and the opening. That depends, I said, on what you do next. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the first honest silence we had sat in together in years, and that, I had come to understand, was where everything real had to begin. 6 months later, I moved into the northern property permanently. The renovation was complete by then, warm wood floors, a kitchen with real light, a study with floor-to-ceiling shelves that I filled slowly and deliberately, the way I intended to fill the rest of my life. No rush. No one else's timeline. Gerald Whitmore's second project became the foundation of a formal investment partnership. I left the accounts administration job on a Friday afternoon, thanked my manager genuinely, and walked out into the kind of ordinary evening that contains, if you are paying attention, the full weight of a life-changing direction. No fanfare. No announcement. Just a door closing softly behind me and a different one, somewhere ahead, already open. Craig filed a consultation with an attorney about the trust, as he had threatened. The attorney apparently told him, in the careful language of someone being paid to deliver bad news, that there was no legal avenue worth pursuing. Craig did not speak to me directly for 4 months. When he finally did, at Marcus's school play, of all places, the two of us standing in the same narrow corridor waiting for the children to file out, he said only, "You did what you had to do." It was not an apology. But from Craig, it was the closest thing to one available, and I accepted it for what it was. Renata and I did not return to what we had been. I think we both understood, without saying it plainly, that what we had been was not something worth returning to. What we built instead was quieter and more honest, phone calls that were shorter but real, dinners that happened because we both wanted them rather than because obligation had sent out an invitation. She paid back the $5,000 in 2 installments, without being asked. She did not make a production of it. She just transferred the money and sent a single line of text, "I know it's late. I know it doesn't cover everything." I replied, "It covers what it needs to." My mother visited the northern property in early spring. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked out at the yard, at the apple trees I had planted along the back fence, at the particular quality of morning light that had made me choose the place in the first instance. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would have been proud of you." I thought about telling her that I wished he had been proud of me while he was alive to say it. I thought about the will, the $62,000, the gentle apologetic voice at the kitchen table. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go, not because it didn't matter, but because I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, on my own land, and there was simply no more room for it. "Thank you, Mom," I said. And I meant it. Marcus still calls me every Sunday. He tells me about dinosaurs and his friends and the small, vivid dramas of a child's week. Last month he asked me if I was happy. The question surprised me. He's 8, and 8-year-olds don't usually ask that. "Yes," I told him. "I really am." "Good," he said, satisfied, and moved on to something about a T-Rex. I smiled at the phone long after we hung up. I had spent so many years being the one who held things together for other people, the maintenance girl, the capable one, the resource that never ran out because no one thought to ask if it needed replenishing. I had mistaken endurance for strength and invisibility for peace. The money didn't change who I was. It just finally gave me enough distance to see clearly what I had always been, not someone who existed to make other people's lives run more smoothly, but a person. A whole, sufficient, unremarkable and extraordinary person, with a kitchen full of morning light and apple trees and 32 years of hard-won quiet finally, fully, belonging to herself. That is where I am now. That is where I intend to stay. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.